As you might know by now, I get really excited whenever I get Cameroonians on this show. Frankly, the guest doesn't even have to actually be Cameroonian, like Nita Ram Kumar, who was on last season. They could have just lived there and I get excited. But why the excitement? I know it's because I love bringing different perspectives on this show, especially from those with an African identity. And as big, diverse, and vibrant as African perspectives can be, they are often still missing from expat conversations. Let's be honest for a moment. Africans are still rarely seen as expats in some spaces, especially compared to Westerners. So anytime I have the opportunity to have someone at the table with that identity, I'm pretty much game. Which leads me to Estelle Hughes. Estelle, as far as I'm concerned, is a total badass. She is Cameroonian, that much is true. She's also a former third culture kid, educator, mom, wife, artist, leader, and a fierce advocate for African teachers and expanding the possibilities of professional development across the continent. In this episode, Estelle shares her own experiences of attending international schools in the Congo, Brazzaville, and how those experiences would impact her as an international educator. She also shares her candid thoughts on what it means to be an African expat, traveling on a less than privileged passport, and the real impact it can have on life and professional choices. And she gives a glimpse of life with a South African husband and their TCKs that they've been raising abroad in Switzerland. It will be clear soon enough that Estelle is absolutely vibrant and charming. But beyond that, you will hear the conviction she has for inclusivity and cultural relevance, especially when it comes to the African voice. Welcome to the Global Chatter. So we're back with the latest episode of the Global Chatter. And as you've heard from the intro, you already have an idea of who my guest is today. I am pumped to have her on the show because she is someone I have wanted to talk to for a good amount of time. And it is, I think I found out about her over a year ago. And now that I finally got her on the show, I'm so excited. So Estelle, welcome to the Global Chatter podcast.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so happy to be here with you today as a fellow Cameroonian.
Yes. I don't have in my mind enough Cameroonians on the show.
Here we go.
So there you go. When I found out about the work that you're doing, I immediately literally thought to myself, I need to find her. And so for those of you who don't know, it's a bit of a quirky story, but there's an organization called the Association of International Educator Leaders, I guess Educational Leaders of Color,
Absolutely.
ALOC. Yeah, okay. Kevin should be proud of me. I think I got that in the first go. But ALOC, if you are not aware, is an organization I feel I've talked about a little bit before, and I did do a quick episode with Kevin a few months ago. But it's really an organization that's really looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, all of those things within the international education community. And so I had the privilege about a year ago to speak at the conference virtually, and Estelle was also one of the other speakers who was, I think, about 2 or 3 people after me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was excited. First of all, she could have been talking about nothing, but the fact that she was Cameroonian,
Go
I said,
Cameroon.
"Oh no, there's a Cameroonian." That's all I was talking about in the chat, which was really sad. Like in the chat, I was like, "There's a Cameroonian!" Woo woo woo, woo, cheering it up.
Yes.
But then the work that she was presenting on, particularly looking at the experiences of African educators, especially when you put them in the international space, I thought, okay, you're someone who needs to come on, because whenever I talk about whether it's travel, immigration, expatriation, cross-cultural living, I will always argue there are not enough African voices
Yes.
in the conversation.
And we will agree. I will
Right?
agree, definitely.
And so having you is just, I think, for me, broadening the conversation, because we don't do it enough. And so Thank you for coming on. And there's a question I always start with, but actually, I think I'm going to start with something different because it's you. So, yeah, don't be scared.
No, thank you for having me.
Here's the thing. In preparation for this, so this is really for me. I don't even know if the audience cares or not, but in preparation for this, I found out that you sing.
Ooh.
Yeah, I didn't know you said, like, not that I didn't think you couldn't sing. It's just it didn't occur to me. And so you're part of a band, right? Or you have a singing group.
I do actually. This is a very old group that we created when we were studying, my husband and I, in the south of France. And so many years after, it's still alive.
Oh my God. How long has the group been around?
Okay. So I said that's when I was studying. So right now I'm going to be revealing how ancient I am.
Oh.
Well, Puzzle Shock was created over 20 years ago in the south of France.
How would you describe the type of music you guys made?
Basically, a little bit of Conrad, who is, South African, and a little bit of me from Cameroon, and a little bit of our international rock culture. It's a very intercultural band, Puzzle Shock, with African sounds mixed with sounds from the rest of the world.
You know what? And I think that's a really good description of kind of the work that you do, right? Wouldn't you say? Just there's the identity that you bring from your Cameroonian West Central African perspective, and then of course with your partner, with his perspective, and then the places you've been. I mean, I think that's that probably already tells people what's been influencing kind of how you do the work that you do. And so with that, this is the question I always start with is, so where in the world are you today? So where are you currently residing?
Well, currently I am in Switzerland, Geneva, in a beautiful part of the city and the outskirts where the vineyards are.
Oh my goodness. Okay. When this is done, I would like to see a picture.
Definitely. It's a place in Geneva called Dardani, and you can see the mountains. And just outside our windows, we've got beautiful vineyards, and we can actually drink the wine that's made in our neighborhood. It's fantastic.
Okay, so I already want that life, but we're not. This is not about.
Oh, please come visit, Amanda.
This is the problem when I start talking to y'all, is that many of you are in places I want to go. But the thing is, the problem is you're all global nomads. So I have to go before you leave.
You do have a window of opportunity.
I have. So for those who don't know, Estelle is in Geneva, but there is a time date on it. There is an end date because she will be returning to the continent and will be heading to Dakar, Senegal, which we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of your work. But yeah, no, I have how many? Okay, I can make this work.
Yes.
I have enough months.
Yes,
I can make this work. Somehow, somewhere, I'm going to get to, I really want a proper trip to Switzerland. If you are there, I know I will get a proper trip.
What is great about Switzerland is that it's beautiful in winter. Yes. And for me to say so, it has to be extra beautiful because I hate the cold.
Same. Sub-Saharan Africa, same.
Still majestic. The mountains, the Alps, the horizon, the sunset, just gorgeous. And it's obviously beautiful in summer as well in this part with the lake. It's like a beautiful place to be.
How long have you been in Geneva?
We landed in Geneva in 2005, so quite a while ago, and we were coming here for a couple of years because that's what we had been doing as international educators. And dial 17 years ago, after we are still here. It says a lot.
And so this is a really good starting point because I want to actually kind of back up from where you are now and kind of start with where you started, where you began. And so obviously listening to this, folks know that you are Cameroonian.
Yes.
So
proudly. Proudly so.
I always explain where Cameroon is. If you don't know where it is, it's to the east of Nigeria. That's the, that's the
Exactly. Gulf
important
of
part.
Guinea.
There you go. It's like we could do it. Or I always say, the fat part of Africa and then the long part meet that corner. That's also
Yes.
Cameroon. Cameroon, if
Sometimes
you
I
don't
also
know.
say it's Africa upside down. Have you noticed the shape of Cameroon? And
You know what?
uh-huh. And then it's also
Okay.
Africa in en miniature, they say in French. That all of
I
the
know, but
different
they say that
landscapes.
it
Hmm.
they say that in English too. My mother says that, to be honest, my mom. So when you said it, I was like, this is a very Cameroonian thing to say.
Cameroon, center of the world, right?
Yes. I mean, when you visit, don't hold us to it, but it'll it's there's a little bit of everything as far as
Yes,
Africa is concerned, I think
absolutely.
in Cameroon. So tell me in terms of your childhood, did you grow up predominantly in Cameroon or did you move somewhere
Mm.
else?
I was born in Yaoundé, Cameroon, where I grew up for 10 years. So I went to preschool and school there. Then we moved to Brazzaville, Congo, where I
Mhm.
studied up to the year of baccalaureate. I went to the French school there in Brazzaville. And after that, I moved to France, where I studied before starting the international education career.
And so what moved your family to Congo?
My dad's job, my dad was an international, is an international banker, was because he's retired now. So my daddy
Mhm.
was posted in Brazzaville at the Banque de Développement des États de l'Afrique Centrale. I don't know what is the equivalent in English. He
I mean,
represented,
I understood. I don't
yeah.
know about anybody else, but I
Yeah, there'll be a little bit
yeah.
of exotic French in this episode. Doesn't hurt, does it? So my dad was representing Cameroon in this organization. So as a diplomat, that's how we got
Mhm.
to move. And I took the plane for the first time. I was 9, I think, to go to Brazzaville. Very exciting.
So my story is my family is Anglophone.
Okay.
And my parents, so they had moved to the US. I was born in the US, clear this accent, right? I've always had it. And then when I was 9, they moved to Yaoundé.
Oh wow!
So I lived in Yaoundé
I
when you
left
were
the
leaving.
spot and you took it.
I have
Fantastic.
no idea how old you are, but by doing the math in my head, I think we're really close in age. Like I
Ah,
moved to Yaoundé.
you're probably younger than I am.
Don't be fooled. Black don't crack. Like
Yeah, you
don't
know
be
what? And
fooled.
I don't mind. You see, this is one thing about African culture that I love. We are okay with aging. Yeah.
Right. It's right. No, but it's funny. So I moved to Yaoundé when my family was 9. They decided to move. They decided to return. I had never lived, right? Because I'd
Hmm.
been raised in the US up until that point. Now, they had almost always lived in the English part, but they decided to move to Yaoundé. And so I lived in Yaoundé for my, what we call in the American system, middle and high school years.
Hmm.
And so you were going to the French school. I was going to the American school
Okay. All
at the
right.
same time.
Yeah, lots of similarities there.
Right. And then I left to come back to the States for university, and you went to France. See, look, this was meant to be.
Parallel journey.
Exactly. So here's what I am very interested in, especially as someone who spent their early years in Cameroon and moved to Congo. I've asked this question before of other African TCKs. So I'm curious to hear your experiences because I don't think we also talk about Africans who move to other African countries, right? We think about people moving to the West and other places. But for you, what was the experience going from Cameroon to Congo? Was it similar? Was there were you an outsider? Like what was it? Because you were a third
Yeah,
culture kid.
I never ever in my life realized that I was a TCK. I was just that
Right?
girl.
Until I say it. I say it to Africans all the time. I'm like, you were a
What's
TCK,
that?
and they're like, you're right. I'm like, it was you. You are the example. So yeah, what was it
Oh,
like for
I'm
you?
so grateful to have had this experience of moving to another African country. If it was really a defining moment. Remember this experience talking to a Congolese girl my age, a friend, and telling her, "You've got this Congolese accent." And she said, "Oh, your
Mm.
Cameroonian accent is also very strong." And I said, "No, I don't have an accent." And she just burst out, she just burst out laughing. And that was the first time I
Right?
realized that I could be the other as well. I just refer to
Mm.
myself as, that I was representing normality. This is a phenomenon that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie describes in Americana when she says before moving to the
Right.
States, she was just a human being. She wasn't black. Before moving to the Congo, I was just a girl. I wasn't Cameroonian, but I became Cameroonian by moving
Mm-hmm.
to Brazzaville. It was a very interesting experience
Mm-hmm.
because I also went to the French school, and there were quite a few
Mm-hmm.
French people there, African students with French accents. So I I got
Mm.
I developed a French accent spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So I was juggling between
Mm-hmm.
these three accents: the Cameroonian accent, the Congolese accent that I could mimic when I was going to church with Congolese people, and the French accent that I had at school. So sometimes I was literally in front of my mirror, trying different accents and asking myself, where is the real Estelle? And it's a beautiful experience to have as a child because it's the first global citizenship education that we come across as GCK, sorry,
Yeah, no,
GCK.
it's interesting, listening to you speak because, I've always the things you've mentioned I've thought about from an American, from an English speaking space. But, having for the fact that you went to a French international school,
Hmm.
did you find it easier to blend in, or was there still challenges coming from somewhere else?
It was very challenging. First of all, very, very strange to have so many white people in the school. I grew up in a Cameroonian school. Everybody was black, and the white people were albinos. So
Yeah.
I wasn't used to that at all, and I did develop a an inferiority complex, I have to say.
Mm.
I did feel inferior as an African, and manifested it in all sorts of ways. I had difficulty really belonging in that space. It took many,
Mm.
many years before finding my feet and feeling that I was, that cool little girl I was in on the playground in Yaoundé. It was tough.
Did you have, from an educational standpoint, did you have any black teachers or professors while you were at the French school?
Let me think. We had a PE teacher who was, I think, either from Chad or Burkina Faso, Monsieur Tetimion. He was loved by the students, a lovely man. He was the only one. All the other black
Mhm.
people were, the door people, the cleaners. So this, and also the fact that there was literally no African topics in the curriculum, literature,
Mm.
history. I remember actually being in the history class and the teacher talking about the 100 Years' War between the British and the French, and feeling so happy that the French won. I was like, yes. And this moment, there was like a voice in my head telling me,
Mhm.
why are you so happy that the French won? You're not even French. But you don't really listen to that voice. Um, these are things that I think about now, but they were pretty unconscious at that time. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on some of the things that I talked about when I spoke at ALOC is that, I too was at an international schools in sub-Saharan Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and how unless there is an intentionality by the teacher and the administration, it is shocking how, at least for those of us, and we admittedly, I hope things have changed a little bit more in international schools, but at least back then, you didn't necessarily get the history or the literature of the country you were living in, which is completely shocking
Yeah.
because, if you were in France, you definitely get French history, right? But to be in Congo and not get a little bit of the Congolese story,
Mm-hmm.
and I could say, for me, not to get a whole lot of the Cameroonian story
Mm-hmm.
is kind of ridiculous.
How is it for you in your school? Did you get some Cameroonian literature, history, perspectives?
So I would say history, no.
Mm-hmm.
What I did get was the English teacher who took on literature and really made world literature,
Hmm.
and she incorporated a significant amount of African literature into what we were studying. So there were names that we knew. Unfortunately, now,
Mm-hmm.
because it was English literature, we did not get maybe Cameroonian English writers,
Mm-hmm.
but we did get West African. So there was at least a conscious, this is where we are in the world,
Oh, you
right?
you were much luckier than I was.
That I know. I was like, because at least I know the names and I know the works and I've read them and I read them young.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you are right. Like, but in terms of history and sort of like how these countries even came to be, who wants to talk about colonialism in the former colony though?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they genuinely, these international schools on the African continent. I think it was a phenomenon that was observable throughout. They really starved African children of African culture. They really uprooted us from African cultures. And I'm very, very curious to know how it is now. I wouldn't really be able to say, but I suspect that it's probably better. I hope. In any case, this is a very clear concern of mine as as I'm moving on to Senegal. This is something that I really want to, develop in the school I'll be leading.
So, obviously you went to the French International School and then you moved to France for university. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay, so I really want to hear your perspective because I have my own stories and people have heard it ad nauseum, so they don't need to hear me.
Okay.
Leaving Congo, right?
Hmm.
So you lived in Cameroon, predominantly black, lived in Congo, predominantly black, but you were in an international school.
Hmm.
How prepared did you feel transitioning, living in France for the first time?
It was a bit of a strange experience because I didn't go to university straight away. I went to something called classe préparatoire.
Mhm.
And seriously, I felt that I didn't really experience a cultural shock in the sense that, I was going from a French school to another French school. The curriculum was similar. My higher level subjects were ancient Greek and Latin. My plan was to become a Latin teacher. And then I started meeting African African communities in the south of France in Montpellier. I was adopted by the Senegalese community and I learned to eat and cook yassa and mafe, chakri and all of that. And all of a sudden, I wasn't so interested anymore about, becoming a Latin teacher. I integrated a gospel choir, Kumbaya gospel choir. And in a way, my most African experience happened in France much more than in Brazzaville. In Brazzaville, I was in that bubble which was very French. And in France, I actually got to become more immersed in new African cultures I didn't know about. Moroccan, um, Senegalese, as
Mhm.
I said. I met Cameroonian communities as well. So there wasn't that
Mhm.
feeling of newness that I would have expected living Brazzaville. I kind of found myself there more than anything else.
Mhm.
Interesting, isn't it?
Mm. Well, yeah, and I think what it seems to help was that because you had that transitional time
Hmm.
and you had communities, because I think that's the challenge for most of us, right? Is that when we go somewhere, if we're not familiar and we don't have people who are kind of support, then it's hard. But it seems like that honestly, before you went, you kind of got an education before you got in
Mm-hmm.
education. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. It
Yeah.
does. Absolutely.
So, what part of France were you in predominantly during this period?
I was in the south of France in a city called Montpellier. It's a very
Montpellier.
vibrant,
Okay.
yeah, very vibrant place, culturally alive. I would say it's the gospel music hub of France. It's incredible how many gospel choirs, quartets, duets you can find in this part of France to today, up to this day. It's a very, very artistic place. I was lucky to study there, and that's how I started a band with my soon my future husband Conrad, whom I met at the university. I was in this gospel music scene, and then he gave me a cassette. You remember these things? Cassettes.
Right, right. You know, I do remember them.
He gave me a cassette
Wow.
with his music, and I put the music on, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is white people's music. I can't
Oh
sing this."
no.
And then he kept coming and asking, "Have you listened to the music?" I didn't know how to break it to him that I didn't do white people's music. And one day I just started, singing to the music that he had created, and it just came totally
Oh my god.
naturally. That's how the band was born. In that way, that sense, that was also a very, opening experience culturally speaking. So I owe a lot to France.
There, now is was your husband French speaking prior to
No.
moving to France?
Well, he had taken French at school. He was
Mhm.
educated in Eswatini in UWC, United World College there,
Yeah.
Waterford Kamklaba. And very interestingly, unlike his friends who went to the UK or the US, he decided that he would study in the south of France. And I often
Huh.
tell him, you were looking for me, weren't you? Because
I mean,
that just doesn't make any sense. But he's always been someone who's really interested in new cultures. He was fascinated by France thanks to a teacher he had actually, who inspired him to love the culture. So he came to that part of the world, and voila.
here he is. Is he? I'm assuming is he fluent at this point?
Oh yes, yes, we met in French. So right,
Okay.
that's really really fascinating because our children go to an international school, the International School of Geneva,
Yeah.
and that school turned them into Anglophones. I like to say you give Francophone students to these international schools, and they turn them into Anglophones. So, but between Conrad and myself, we speak French most of the time, but our children respond in English, but they understand
But-
French. Yeah, no, what a family.
and his mother is his mother tongue English or something
It's
else?
English, but
Okay.
our
But
lingua franca between the two of us is
is
French.
French. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, you just have wonderfully what is it?
Bilingual?
Bilingual children. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I wish they would have been, trilingual with the African languages as well, because I'm also a product of this period when African parents didn't speak their own language to their children.
Same.
And
Same.
I had to basically, concentrate on my memory to get all that I could of my own language with willpower, because yeah, at home it was often French.
Yeah, my sister is fluent. So my parents were two different tribes, so they didn't speak their tribal languages to each other. But my parents are now divorced, but my sister is fluent. Like my older sister, so she can speak literally the mother tongue, my mom's tribal
Brilliant.
language. But I am not.
You
I'm
know,
not
that's
there.
that's that's a very very fascinating phenomenon. In my family, there's six of us, six siblings, three boys, three girls. My mom was all about symmetry, you know,
Yeah,
and I think three of us speak the language quite comfortably, and
and
three
three of you,
not a word.
as it should.
Same
No.
same parents, same upbringing. I don't know.
And yeah, wide work.
How did you make the transition into international education, which is where I think most people know you from?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be in education from a very young age, and I knew that I loved Latin and English, but I wouldn't have acknowledged it at any cost in front of friends because you're a teenager. What do you want to be when you older? I want to be a teacher. No, that doesn't work. So that was my secret. I just kept it to myself, but it was a no-brainer that I wanted to be a teacher. So I studied in this classe préparatoire. It's called in French, which is a very literary and very academic system preparing you to integrate these very prestigious schools in Paris, École Normale Supérieure, etc., Sciences Po. But I never integrated the school. Instead, I went to university. So in these two first years, it was ancient Greek, Latin, philosophy, history, languages, very literary. So my idea was maybe I would pick one of these subjects and teach it in France, who knows, or go back to Cameroon. Then I realized that as a Cameroonian, I was not allowed to teach in the French system. I could take the exam, but I wasn't going to be integrated into the system. I was like, why take the exam then? you know? So I wound up, yeah,
Let me ask a question because you can see my face. My face.
I know.
Not being able to get an opportunity, was that only towards foreigners? Was that towards Africans? Was that what was the
I think probably towards certain nations. I never really investigated that. I also found out when I was studying that if I integrated the Grande École, I would have to pay for it when all of my classmates were going to be, spontaneously access to scholarships to the Grande École. So, you feel that feeling of isolation was very deep in classe préparatoire, much deeper than when I was studying in Brazzaville, where as time went, I was making friends, I was getting closer. Some of the friends I still have today, and I'm very proud to call my friends. But in Montpellier, in my boarding school, I was the only black girl there studying Latin and ancient Greek and what have you. And I also discovered that I wasn't gonna get, the same ride as my fellow students. So I started wondering what I was gonna do with my life. And when I met Conrad and we started, playing music, the project changed. We were gonna become rock stars now.
from that gospel tape though?
No, it was a
Okay.
rock tape. It was a rock tape.
Okay, sorry.
Follow,
From that rock
Amanda.
tape.
On the ball.
Sorry, from the rock tape though.
Yeah,
Okay.
the rock tape was amazing, It made me change my whole musical perspective, and I'm still benefiting from the impact right now.
Okay.
Yeah. How did we start in international education? I think it was more Conrad's influence because he was coming from the UWC scene, and it was quite spontaneous for him to go back to that type of scene. That's where his network was. So we went to a UWC school in India, Mahindra United World College, and that's when I thought this was what I was meant to do. A really, really fantastic moment, a defining moment in my life, landing in India, something I will never forget.
And here's the thing is that I mean it makes sense. Both of you, so your husband attending UWC and for those of you who don't know, you've already alluded and said it, United World Colleges, boarding schools around the world, very much there's a international perspective to everything that they do. And then you going to the French school, both of you were third culture kids. So it
Yes.
makes sense whether, and once again, this language, and I put myself in this, but this language of being a third culture kid and these experiences you didn't hear them as much in, the times that we were coming up in school. But it makes sense that you would go back and work with those same kids, right? Who had some of the, I mean, they may not necessarily look like you always, but who had some of the same cultural experiences. You touched on something I would love for you to get your perspective on, and it was even, as you're building out this career as an international educator, but I remember your presentation from ALOC where you talked about the challenges that African educators in particular have on the international school scene. And I bring that up even thinking about the fact that you were looking at an opportunity in France, and then all of a sudden it was A, the opportunity would not be available to you, and B, there would be no funding if you decided to go on with this thing, right? What have you seen, like, for people who don't know, and I think this is a great platform for this, just in the work that you've done, because you've been in several countries and worked around the world, what are the challenges that African educators face when they are working in international schools or trying to even get into international schools?
I think the very first one is our passport. You have much more access if you have with your African passport another nationality. It opens doors. I'm 100% Cameroonian. I don't have another nationality. And it's about getting visas. I've had to stay back in India, for example, when we were moving on to the Netherlands. I had to stay back in India because I wasn't giving the visa to follow Conrad to the Netherlands.
Wow.
And this experience was constant. I would go to professional development with a friend with a French passport in Lebanon, and she would go through the border no problem, and they would keep me back, and for hours asking me, why are you coming here, what's your business here, etc., when are you leaving. So that has been a clear challenge for me. People who recruited me truly wanted to have me in their school because I'm clearly not an easy passport to invite. And many times, in many instances, I was invited to lead workshops in European countries, and they just denied me the visa, so they had to cancel the workshop. So this is a big challenge for teachers, educators with African passports. Then you would think that, for example, being married to someone who has a European passport mitigates it only to a certain extent. But I'm
Mm.
also aware of the fact that this privilege does exist for me. The fact that my husband's passport has opened doors for me, but it hasn't been enough of a privilege, for example, to allow me to access some of the opportunities that were given to me. I wasn't able to access because of my passport. Then you also have the issue of the the native speaker issue, whether or
Right.
not you come from a country where English is spoken. As an African, you're often not considered native speaker, and this is a discussion that is hot at the moment in
Right.
international education, and things are changing. But it's a lot of schools are very reluctant to. They will change it on paper, but mentalities take time to evolve.
Okay, now I know I opened a whole box when I asked that question. So
You
now,
did.
now I got a bunch of follow-ups. Okay. Always the fun thing about this podcast is that nobody can see my facial expressions, but the people who know me know I react to the
Yes,
crazy. I always react to the crazy stuff. I'm like,
I confirm that.
my face was like, oh, really? What? Is this happening? That was all happening. So if you didn't see my face, Estelle's the only one, you know what happened. Okay, so let's back it up. What kind of passport does your husband have?
Well, my husband has got two passports, a South African passport and a British passport. And guess which one helps him the most?
I mean, I don't know. Brexit is
Yeah, things have just changed
things
recently.
have changed, so haven't they?
And that's so funny because deep down inside, I mean, I could say that my husband has got he's got a British heritage for sure, and your identity is multiple. But if you ask him spontaneously, where do you come from? It's like South Africa. It's Africa for sure.
Okay, so the British passport, did he have a parent, or was it how did he get
Oh
how did he
that's
acquire the British passport basically?
yeah, but through his parents,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. And then the South Africa, but he also was raised in South Africa,
He was
correct?
born in South Africa. He grew up there, but was moved to Eswatini, then
For school.
Swaziland
Then
for
yeah.
schooling.
Cool. Okay. So here's my question. I have wondered this. So this is perfect. You are the perfect person to answer this question. It's random as hell. But
Okay, let's
but
go. Let's go.
Okay. So is there a privilege with him having a South African passport as a white male?
A South African passport, I have to say, opens more doors than a Cameroonian passport.
Oh, madam, we know this one.
As a whole, for example, right. My kids have been able to go with their dad to Ireland. I wasn't coming because I wasn't interested in trying to get the visa without having to have a visa. Yeah. Is there an additional privilege being a white person with that passport? I'm sure there is. The thing is, we travel very little apart from going back to Cameroon and going back to South Africa. And when we go to South Africa, we obviously use his South African passport, no visa paid.
Right.
And there at the airport, for example, I haven't witnessed any different treatment for him
Okay.
as a white South African. What I have seen though is in other parts of Africa, when we travel together, him being allowed to leave the airport and not me. And I'm like, you're going to just stay here. You're not going and visiting the city without me. We're just going to suffer together. He's okay with that. Or the obvious thing of and that very interestingly never happens in South Africa. It has happened in other places that we were in a queue and he's been asked to just, jump the queue, come here, you white man, you cannot wait, jump the queue.
Like, can I bring my whole family with me?
And it's no, he just doesn't do it,
So, okay. So then in terms of your children then, what passports do they have?
They have South African passports. So we've got South African kids, which is very interesting because sometimes you travel, you've got Conrad with his British passport, me with my Cameroonian passport, and my kids with the South African passports. And they're like, did you adopt them? No. Look at their faces. My daughter looks exactly like her father. My son looks like me. They are mine. Don't you dare
deny me.
Do not deny my motherhood, please.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that was a detour, but you know what's really funny is that I feel like the very first episode of this podcast ever, I had asked that question. I asked it out loud. I was like, I was actually curious if there's a privilege to having, if you are white with a South African passport, going, especially if you're going west, right? I was just curious. So I feel like you've shined a little bit of a light on stuff because I just wondered.
Your passport is your passport, I feel, when you're traveling and asking for visas, etc. However, when you land, that's when the facial privilege can intervene, and looking black and looking white does have an impact in the world we live in, doesn't it? Yeah, it does come with privilege.
You hit on two things in the earlier question I asked. I think it's very important for people to hear and understand the fact that you've had work interrupted and or not happen because you didn't have access because of your passport, which is not surprising, but it's still horrifying every time I hear. Like, I've heard this for years, but it still catches me off guard. Like, we're still doing this. But the other part, and as you said, is the debate that's going on in international schools is, what does it mean to be a native speaker? Because you remember when we were talking about colonization earlier? Oh, let's be honest. Americans being native speakers,
They are. And Kenyans are, and Nigerians are.
We were all British colonies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for those who don't quite understand, I know where you're going with this and I know what you're talking about. Kind of unpack what it means when we're seeing this in international schools. Like what does it mean when an employer is asking for a native speaker? Wink wink.
I'm just going to talk about my experience and what I've seen. For example, I had a colleague in one of the schools I taught at who had a very strong Indian accent. And students would actually go and complain to management about her accent, saying we can't understand what she says, etc. And the management would obviously say, well, you know what, you need to get used to the accent because that's the accent that she has, full stop, but that people think, parents, students thought that it was okay to go and complain about someone's accent. It speaks volume, and that still happens in international education. A native speaker now is it's like around the whole. It's something that is the center of a whole debate, and the idea is basically to understand that people who have been speaking English since when they were small, well, basically, and even if they speak all the languages, basically they are native speakers of English. But what is this business of native speaker? I mean, I'm a teacher of English literature, and my first language is French. And I've had, students getting the highest mark in the IB, even though they're taught by a francophone Cameroonian lady. So we need to stop that. We need to focus on people's skills, whether they were speaking English 10 years old, 3 years old, 27 years old. What are the skills that you actually need? And if the person has them, let's go.
Do you think this gatekeeping is partially to basically say we are trying to attract Western, I don't know, Western trained, Western educated, Westerner educators to a school? And if that's the case, do you think that maybe, and it's interesting because you gave that example, is some of the pushback coming from parents who expect because it's an international school, they don't necessarily want, they want teachers from certain places, but they do not want teachers from other places. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. I've had conversations with heads of schools in my work with my NGO Africa Learning International, where I heard all sorts of interesting things. Like, my parents here are not paying so much money to hear African accents. I'm like, are you serious? And the person was actually damn serious. Um,
Of course they were. Wow.
we've got a lot of self-hatred, embedded self-hatred, inferiority complexes that are, stopping us from really soaring to our potential. And there's this culture of scarcity actually that contributes to us being scared of opening the gate. Well, if everybody has access, there'll be less for me,
Mhm.
and people need to understand that there's enough space around the table for everybody to access, because as international education is growing at the rate it's growing today, we'll need more and more teachers with an international outlook. There is space for everybody. Let's just all relax.
And I mean, and this has always been my challenge is that if you're an international school, you want it to be as diverse as it can be because these students are going all over the world, right? Where they're going to continue their education, whether they stay in the region, whether they go to Europe or North America or to Africa, to Asia, Australia, or South America. And so, what are we saying if we are not preparing them for the world we're in? Because let's say you even go into business, right? So you have a student you work with now that goes into business after university.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very complex question, because on the one hand, you've got these traditional international schools that are typically expats and able to recruit a very diverse workforce. And they might or might not choose to be as diverse as they can be, depending on their philosophy.
Hmm.
Then you also have a new type of international schools that are more rooted in the local culture, where there is less access to an international labor force, and the teachers are from the actual country where the school is. And I want people to change their approach to diversity, taking into account these different contexts. Diversity for me is first and foremost cultural. In an international school based in Cameroon, for example, with lots of Cameroonian teachers, yes, it's good to have access to someone from a European and Asian country. It brings a lot of cultural wealth. But if that's not affordable for the school, the African diversity within that school, how is it leveraged? How Pan African are we, for example? How
Ah,
can we there's a lot that we can leverage that is just isn't leveraged because we have a very limited definition of what diversity is. It's not only visible, diversity is cultural, diversity is about a posture in education as well. So we need to enrich our definition of diversity to fit all of these different contexts.
that is such a great concept and a great way of thinking about things. Like even that Pan African model, right? That, like you said, it doesn't have to be visually different, but it can be culturally different, right? And having, even recognizing the achievements and what teachers from different African continents can bring, even if they are all black and brown, right? A- a- And not just assuming that, okay, well, the school has more, let's be honest, more European looking folks. Therefore, it's better,
Absolutely.
which is not
Absolutely.
necessarily true.
That's why we really have to indigenize more than internationalize, because if everybody is going to their true indigenous roots, there
Mhm,
is bound to be diversity, really,
mhm.
in the schools we're talking about.
So let me ask you. I want to pivot a little bit about this because I know you've been talking about this for a while. You've done presentations, you've done consulting on this. Um, in terms of your consulting work, where do you really put your efforts towards? So if a school or if someone is coming you to come and speak and talk, what are the areas that you're really trying to get the organization to look into? What are they calling you for?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I work a lot with schools on the African continent that are in the private sector, not necessarily international, but
Mhm.
who are suffering from the scarcity of professional development.
Mm,
So I am able with this type of schools to support them with recent research, and in the process learn more about how they work, their conditions, etc. So I really do see it as my way to come close to the African continent I've been missing for so long, bringing what I've got and receiving what the teachers, educators, school leaders have to offer. I also work with international schools, and
mhm,
this is mostly DIJ work, focus on
mhm,
culture. This course twice, teaching in with inclusion of culture embedded, that I deliver together with Estelle Bunya Fomeju, who's also Cameroonian, who's also called Estelle. I only work with Estelles.
of course.
And
And you only work with Cameroonians,
all
Cameroonians as well.
Cameroonians. No, that's a joke, obviously. So that course really refocuses us on culture, the importance of culture, how we need to think twice about culture when teaching. The first thing we need to do is look in the mirror at ourselves, see how where we stand reflects a cultural posture. There is no educational posture that doesn't have a cultural dimension. There is no truth. You teach the way you teach, you lead the way you teach because you come from a specific cultural background, and it's not universal. No, no, no. There are many different ways of doing it. So that's twice. Twice is about looking at yourself in the mirror, reflecting on how your culture impacts your teaching or leading, and then taking it forward to integrating your students' cultures, your school community's cultures in the education that you deliver.
Okay, so you're like a super busy lady because I feel like that alone is probably enough work.
There's no boredom. There's no boredom.
Right. And we alluded to this earlier, but you will be heading back to the continent, you and your family will be heading to Senegal. And so I imagine that puts you closer to more of those schools that you like to work and serve with, especially being on the continent. Is that what you're thinking is going to happen anyway?
Yeah, well, I hope so. At the International School of Dakar, I will find, I think, a very strong community, and I will learn a lot from the culture that is already there. And I have to say, my focus will first be to learn about the school and to grow roots there. And I will try to continue my work with other schools at the same time, grow these synergies with Senegal and
Mhm.
beyond, because I believe that there's a lot that we can learn from teachers teaching in different contexts as us. And I hope that this is the type of professional development that I can bring to ISD, growing roots in Senegal and in Africa, as well as, opening global wings.
All right. So I can't let you go until I do something that I don't do consistent enough, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like you'd be really good for this. I call it my lightning round. And I got 3 questions. You just have to respond off the top of your head
Mm-hmm.
what you think is the best or
Now I'm
what comes
scared.
in. and then I always have to say, don't be scared. It's not that stressful.
Okay.
Okay. First question. If you had to introduce somebody to one Cameroonian dish, what would it be?
Kepen Kebaz, which is
Go ahead.
this is the Bafia dish. I come from Bafia, and this is a dish made out of maize. All right,
Mhm.
and we eat it with all sorts of different green vegetables, leafy vegetables, and it's
Everything in
delicious.
Cameroon is eaten with green you know that, right?
That's
Dole,
true.
eru, like
Absolutely.
all green
There's
vegetables.
there's so many things that I could have said. Ndole, of course.
My
Aloko.
God, loving Dole. I went and saw my family, and I was actually kind of sad because no Dole was made. Everything else was made. Coconut rice. There was eru, got it, everything, but there was no Dole. And I looked at my sister and said, "Next time, I'll be back.
Yeah.
I want Dole." All right, number 2. Let's flip it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in Geneva, what's one thing you must absolutely do if you're visiting for the first time?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I think that you should come to my place, come to Dardani, where the wine is.
Where the wine flows. Okay, you already made that case earlier.
All right. Now, Geneva, Switzerland is so beautiful. You obviously want to go to the mountains. There's this beautiful site around Montreux with beautiful vineyards, well, overlooking the lake, which is something that you cannot miss. Generally speaking, I'm in love with the region of Montreux. Wouldn't miss that part of Switzerland if you came.
Final question, because you are leaving Europe and you are returning to the African continent, what's one thing you look forward to moving back to Africa?
Fashion and fabrics. The two
And
S.
tailors.
Uh-huh.
Tailors.
I am ready. Ready for
God.
that.
Man, that alone. Whew, I miss that life. Oh my
Absolutely.
gosh. Estelle, thank you so much for coming to hang out on the podcast.
Thank you,
I'm-
Amanda, for having me.
I'm proud of myself that I'm like, okay, I got through what I wanted to at least get through, and I did it because I wasn't sure. I felt like you and I could probably go for 4 hours, but I'm like, they don't need 4 hours of this.
Yes, we'll probably carry on once the podcast's over.
That's what I was going to say. And I was going to say, worst case scenario, I can bring her back on and we can talk about other stuff. But I am excited for the journey that you have coming forward.
Thank you.
As always, I put the contact information of each of our guests in the show notes and on the website. So if you would like to reach out to Estelle or you want to follow the work that she's doing, you can definitely visit us at theblackexpat.com or theglobalchatter.com, and you can catch all of her social media. I will not make her recite it, but thank you once again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.